What do you know? What do you know? All right, I want to tell you a story tonight. Yeah, I can smell it up here, and I don't think it's from here. You gonna sit by her? You're so sweet. Where's your husband? Oh, he's working back here or something. Okay. I was like, he ain't even sitting with you. Yeah, you're definitely walking home after that. Wow. Who's fired up about being here tonight? I want to tell you a story about David and Goliath. And I want to walk through that story tonight in a little bit different way, probably. As you can tell, we're giving away like sardines, so we do things a little different here. And I hope it's not on me. Note to self, burn jeans. But I'll burn it all. But what we're talking about in this whole series is God's power. And how the whole theme of gas and giving away gas, we talked about, Chris came up and gave us a great illustration of how an engine runs last week and talked through that and how important gas is to that, right? It's pretty important. And in that, we talked about the fact that if you want to live the life God called you to live, you must live it by His power. And what we ended it with last week was a statement that I made that you need to cut yourself some slack, because what God does is He actually makes His power known through your weaknesses. So for all those things that you consider weaknesses and all those things that, smells getting to me. All those things that you think in your life you just can't overcome and Satan beats you up over them, God actually uses those when you give them to Him, and He uses those to show off His power. So what we're talking about last week is to cut yourself some slack and accept that power. Tonight we're talking about the power to overcome, and the power to overcome the ultimate enemy in your life. And we'll talk more about that as we go through the story. But I want to read out of 1 Samuel chapter 17. And yes, we'll do a lot of reading tonight, so you can pull up your chairs for story time if you want to. But verse 1, it says this: Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Sokah in Judah. They pitched camp at this place, between this place and this place. And Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill, and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. So here's the picture. The Philistines and the Israelites are about to fight. And what you've got is there's a valley in the middle, and they're camped out on each side of that valley on the top of a hill. Giving you the little visual there. Verse 4, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was over 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Verse 8, Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel. He's a Philistine. He shouted at Israel, why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he's able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Then the Philistine said, this day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. So here's your story. You got 2 groups, one on the top of each hill. One huge guy from the Philistines comes out every morning and says, hey, Israelites, here's what we'll do. You send one guy out here. We won't worry about all these armies. We won't worry about all the other people. You send one man out here, and if he kills me, then all of my people will be your slaves. But if I kill him, all of your people will be our slaves. So bring it. And he's 9 foot tall, and he's got huge armor. And I would think that he would be ego-driven enough not to worry about his shield bearer, but he even brings his shield bearer out there, so he's actually behind a big plate of steel. But he goes out there every morning, and what it says about the Israelites is they listen to him, and then they run and hide because they are scared to death. And I want to ask you this evening, What issue is it in your life that scares you to death? What issue is it that you've never dealt with that you need to deal with in order to be everything that God's called you to be? This could be anything from the way that you treat your wife, the way that you treat your husband. It could be a drug that you're addicted to. It could be a health issue for you, and you've just decided that this is always going to be an issue for you, and it's that one thing that every time you start doing something good, Satan brings up to you and reminds you of that one thing in your issue life that you've never dealt with. Maybe a relationship from 10 years ago that you've never dealt with, and you did something or were offended by somebody, and you've never been able to move on. I want you to think of that issue in your life tonight. What's the one thing you've never been able to give over to God? For some of you, it may very well be your salvation because you're thinking, okay, I've never even given my life to God. Well, that's your issue for tonight. And what happens in your life in salvation or in any other issue is that God constantly puts it before you for you to deal with it. Once it gets before you, then Satan begins to try to take over and let you know that you can't deal with it. And there's no way that in your power and your strength that you'll ever be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish. But that's what the Israelites are dealing with right now, is they're dealing with something that they see as bigger than themselves. And that none of them could go out and whip this guy because he's 9 foot tall and huge. And I'm guessing they were all like 4'1". So to them, he was the giant and that we've seen the story after story of. But make it personal tonight and think through what your issue is. What is it? Maybe God's got you doing something that you've not been okay with yet. I don't care if it's anything from a drug addiction to a what's God want from me addiction to a I got a house and this is an issue here and we bought it and should have. I don't care. You deal with God on that and find out what your issue is. As we keep reading, verse 12, now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was old and well advanced in years. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and every evening and took his stand. Basically what you've got is the same group of people on 2 different hills, looking at the same valley every day, and the same giant walking out there every morning and saying, okay, do you people have anybody that's going to fight me today? And they never one time had anybody willing to step up and say, I'll give whatever I've got to give. I'll trust God enough to go and fight this giant, and I'll do what I've got to do to defeat him. They never had that. So for 40 days in a row, this giant kept coming out. What do you think the Israelites were thinking on like day 37? Any ideas? That's probably a lot of what they were thinking. Self-pity. Hey, leave us alone. Hey, somebody come protect us from this huge giant. I think they're thinking, another thing they're thinking is this: how many days is this guy going to come do this? Because as long as we just sit here and never move, maybe he won't come in here and beat us all up. And I think that they really believe that if they ignored this problem, it would go away. And I want you to take that back to your personal life real quick. And I want you to understand that if there's an issue in your life that you've never dealt with, if there's a relationship in your life that you've not dealt with, if there's an addiction in your life that you've not dealt with, it does not go away because you choose to ignore it. It does not ever go away because you choose to ignore it. Now, you may say, well, after 10 years or so, I kind of forgot about it. It has not gone away. Because if God calls you to deal with it, he means for you to deal with it. He does not mean for you to ignore it and put it back behind something else and hopefully you'll forget it over time. That's not God. And that's not what he wants in our life, and that's not what he expects from us as his children. So for the salvation issue, that will never go away. If you're not willing to deal with it, God's going to continue calling you. There may come a day where you don't feel that anymore. But until you stop and deal with God and deal with salvation issues and deal with how is my personal relationship with him, you'll never have that. And if it's some other issue in your life, I want you to hear from me tonight that it's time to deal with that. And we'll get to at the end of this message and at the end of this story that we're telling tonight, we'll get to the fact that it's God's power that's going to get you through this anyway. But you need to understand as we listen to this story, the things we can hear from the story about David and a group of Philistines and a group of Israelites that are waiting to have a big fight. I want you to understand that your enemy's not going away. And I know that's not really encouraging, and we've been having a great night, and oh my goodness, why is he getting all serious now? But that's the truth. If you've got something from your past you've never dealt with, you must deal with it, because it doesn't just slip away. See what's next. It says Jesse sends David to check on his brothers. We just heard David is the youngest son of Jesse, and the other three were the oldest, and he sends them out there to check on him because he hadn't heard anything in a while. So verses 20 and 21 says, early in the morning, David left the flock with a shepherd, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle position, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. I want you to hear something else too. It says this. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Okay, 40 days in a row they've gone to these battle positions, probably shouting out the same war cry. Somebody just give us an example of what a war cry sounds like. Okay, none of you ever go to war with me. That's all I'm saying. Ooh, ooh. That's your war cry. Bunch of Mo's in town. Give us something, Mo. That's a run from war cry. Every day for 40 days, these guys have gotten up and screamed and shouted their war cry and ran to their battle positions so that one guy can walk out in that valley and say, let's go, and they all go running scared back to their holes. I want you to hear something. It does not matter how much noise you make. It does not matter how much of a good show you put on. It does not matter what you tell us you're going to do. It does not matter what you tell us you're prepared to make happen. It does not matter when you say tonight, I'm going to go home and do this, when you know in your heart you're not going to go home and do that. It doesn't matter if you tell us, I'm stopping this addiction tonight, when you know good and well you're not going to. It doesn't matter if you tell us, I'm going to go call that person and deal with that relationship right now, when you know good and well, as soon as you get away from us, you're putting that in the past, and you're going to wait and see if that'll go away. Do y'all remember middle school? Anybody still in middle school? You remember that when two guys were about to fight, but actually they were just standing face to face and walk in a circle? And you know right up front nobody's hitting anybody, because they're both way too scared of the other guy to actually throw a punch at somebody, but they're just standing there and they're going in a circle. And they're giving it all that. You talk about my mom again, I'll talk about you, mom. You talk about my John. You remember those days? Some of you are like, yeah, and I was in that circle, I was scared to death. I was just hoping he didn't hit me. But you know what that says? Hey, nice show, boys. If you're going to stand in a circle, hit somebody. If you're going to be there, do something. Because here's the deal. If you're in that circle walking around, you're already getting in trouble. But what we see is a group of people that got up every morning and went and cried out for battle and got scared when they got their first challenge. How many times have you said in your own life, I am going to solve this problem. I am going to deal with this issue. I am done with my addiction. I am done with that relationship. I am done with this. I am done with being thousands of dollars in debt. I am done with being this kind of problem. I am done with this. Only the next day to get up and go right back to the life you've been living the whole time. You know what that is? That's exactly what the Israelites did. They got up, they screamed, they shouted, they got the war eagle going on, and then they went and sat on a hillside and watched the guy come challenge their manhood and ran home scared every time. See what happened when David shows up, because he's there now and he's listening to this. In verse 22 to 27, it says, David got there and he left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines and greeted his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. When the Israelites saw the man, they all ran from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his father's family from taxes in Israel. Now, what would you guys do for being exempt from taxes? Show me the giant, baby. Can I get some gas money out of this deal? That's what you're thinking. But that's what David says in verse 26. David asks the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. That's like offering me like a Sonic burger and Diet Coke and saying, go for it. I'd be like, yo, ho, you said what? I get what? I mean, if you eat sardines, you get $100, right? Yeah, well, you stink. Verse 31. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, who is the leader of the Israelite army, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul replied, you are not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him. You are only a boy, and he has been fighting man from his youth. Let me ask you this question. Have you ever stepped up and decided you're going to deal with your issues and solve your problem and go to God with it, and somebody told you couldn't handle it? You ever set up a goal in your life and you set that goal out there and you laid it out in front of somebody that's a friend or a family member and you said, this is what I'm going to accomplish, and they said, ain't no way. You ever had a teacher tell you at school, you know what, you don't need to be taking this class because you're not going to make it? You had a parent that told you, hey, you know, you're not going to amount to anything. Guys, I want you to understand that that's exactly what David was hearing from the leader of the Israelite army. When he says, hey, this guy is defying my God, and I'm going to go kill him. And the guy says, no, there's no way you can do that. You're just a boy. You're just a young kid. You can't even, there's no way. He's been fighting forever. You can't go kill him. And I want you, every time you get a chance, to challenge the heck out of anybody that tells you you can't do something. Because we live in this world where we allow people to tell us all kinds of things about ourselves. And we allow people to tell us constantly, you know what? It'd be great if you could do that, but you can't. You know why? Because of your past. You know why? Because you're not who you should be. You know why? I know who you were 10 years ago, and there's no way you can change that much. All a bunch of bull. I know how long you've been addicted to that drug. You can't beat that. I know how much debt you're in. You can't get out of that. I want you to understand, God's got a lot of power, and he's waiting to use all of that power to get you to where you need to be. But you can't get there if you stop and you've sounded your battle cry, and the first challenge comes up, and there's nothing there, and you go running home scared. But David said, I'm going to fight this guy, and I'm going to make sure he's dead. Then David finally convinces Saul that he's done a great job as a shepherd and killed lions and all these kind of things. He basically tells him the story, listen, man, I've done all this stuff. I've taken care of these sheep. Anytime a lion came up, I'd just grab it and beat it down, you know, like all of y'all do in the wilderness. Yeah. But he convinces him finally that he is the one that can go and fight this battle. Then David says, the same God that got me through all of this will get me through this. This is one of the statements I really want you to hear tonight. You must remember that the same Jesus that's gotten you through everything in your past will get you through everything in your future. And if you don't know Jesus yet, you need to understand that the testimonies of the people around you, they will tell you over and over and over again that the same God that got them through it last year will get them through it today and will get them through it this year, because Hebrews says Jesus is the same today and tomorrow and forever. And that's exactly what David is telling Saul. He's like, hey, listen, the same God that's protected me all my life is going to protect me today. And I'm not scared of this giant because he's been with me all the way through. And as we apply this stuff to our lives, you need to understand that that God that got you through the last time, One of the things that I think is so funny about my own life is I deal with the same issue numbers of times, and God always gets me through it, but I always worry the next time I deal with it. You know, you've been there. You've gotten to that point where you don't have money to pay the house payment, but God always gets you through. But every month you worry just like you did the last month. And there has to come a time at some point when we say, you know what, God? I think that was you for the last 2,700 months that got my house payment. I think I'm going to trust you this month. Let's just make a dynamic change. I think this month you're going to do it again. That's what David was saying to him. The same God's going to do the same thing as he went. So basically, Saul finally goes for it. He puts him in this armor, and he puts him in a whole bunch of armor that Saul wore, and it's basically way too big for David. So he's walking around looking like a goofball with all this huge stuff on. He says, you know what, I can't wear none of this. I can't do this because I haven't been used to it. This is not my size. It doesn't fit me, whatever. I'll just take care of it. So in verse 40, this is what he says. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. List for me what David has to go fight this giant. 5 rocks, a sling, and a stick. So all these guys with all this armor in the entire Israelite army, every morning they scream out their war eagle. I'm giving you props tonight. They scream out their battle cry. They go to their spot. They have all their armor ready. The one guy comes out, and they all run off. And this guy steps up with 5 rocks, a slingshot, and a stick. Anybody have any idea why he would do that? That's what he was used to, and God. Because let me explain something to you. When you begin to fight that battle in your life with God, you figure out that you don't need a lot of the things that you thought you needed. And you're not going to need a lot of the things that the world tells you you're going to need. What you need is exactly what God has to offer you. Now, does that mean don't use any help? No. He had 5 stones, and he had a slingshot, and he had a stick. And those are the things God told him to take. In your life, as you deal with these issues, what do you think those stones would be? You know what I think in a practical sense those stones are? Practical things that help you every day. You know, an AA meeting can be a stone. You know, a small group with a group of people around you to help you can be one of the stones in your slingshot. You know, a group of people that has been through what you've been through and is trying to get to the next level just like you are, a person that's been there and done that and fixed that problem in their own life can be one of those stones that God helps you and hands you to go and fight your battle. I want you to understand, it is not about you fighting this battle on your own, but it is about God providing you everything you need to get this done. And that's exactly what he did with David. And he gave him exactly what he needed. Verse 45 to 47, we'll wrap it up pretty quick. It says, David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you defied. I want you to notice what he did not list in there. What did he not list? 5 stones, a slingshot, and a stick. Why? Because that ain't the deal with David. Like TK said just a minute ago, he's fighting with God. He didn't really care what he's got in his pocket because he knows where the true source of power is coming from. Verse 46, this day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. I love being straightforward. Today I will give you the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds. I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. This dude just walked out there. He's a kid. He goes out there against this giant and says, listen, dude, here's the deal. I'm going to kill you today. And once I do that, then I'm going to cut off your head. And then I'm going to kill all your people. And then I'm going to leave their carcasses out here so that one day they can do a meat product deal and they can eat one of those, which would not smell any worse than those sardines, but that's completely beside the point. But this is what David is saying. I'm here to kill you, and I'm not going to kill you with a rock. I'm not going to kill you with a stick. I'm not going to kill you with a slingshot. God is going to kill you today. And I need you to say something. You've heard the statement in your life, say it till you believe it. I need you to get over the fact that you don't think you can do what you really need to do. I need you to get past the idea of that battle's just too big for me. I could never get over this addiction. I could never let go of that. I could never stop doing that. You need to get past that. Because the God that built you and created you and provides you the power is done hearing that. And he's waiting for you to step up like David and begin to speak it until you believe it in your own life. Because David didn't walk out there and say, you know what, there's a good chance that you're going to die today. Or, you know, you're pretty huge and I'm probably going to die today, but by chance I might make it this time. You know what? That's what you do every time you start a health kick. That's what you do every time you try to get over that addiction. That's what you do every time you try to make that phone call to deal with that relationship. I might make it this time, but you know what? I really doubt it. That ain't what David said. David stepped up, looked his number one enemy in the face and said, you know what, dude? God's going to kill you today. And once he does that, I'm going to take your sword and I'm going to chop off your head. And then we're going to go eat lunch. But what I want you to do and what I want you to see is that enemy is staring you in the face every day. Look at it like God calls you to look at it. Say to it, God is going to kill you today. Say to it, God is going to free me from you today. Say to your enemy, I don't have to worry about you anymore because the God of all creation is bigger than you and bigger than me, and he is going to take care of you. But we've got to get past these things. And I want to show you a few more minutes of what this does. In verse 48, as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. I love the fact that he's not slow. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. Just the same point I made earlier, God always gives you exactly the tools you need to do the job he calls you to do. And you know what? When he calls you to do a job, he'll make sure you have the tools. Because he's not about putting you out in front of something and somebody and saying, hey, go do this, and by the way, I'm not going to equip you for any of it. You just go do it. That's not God. And he showed David that he gave him exactly the tools that he needed. One rock, a slingshot. Didn't even need the stick, didn't need the other 4 rocks. Look at verse 51. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the scabbard. After he killed him, he cut off his head with a sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran away. So you know what? The Philistines were just like the Israelites. They were putting all their hope in the wrong thing. And when that thing went away, they were done. But I want you to see what this did. When you work really hard to beat down one of your enemies, kill it and make sure it is dead. You ever had one of those things where you've had that addiction and you've tried really hard to get over it and you've put it behind you for 6 months and then all of a sudden it comes back? You've been free of that drug for 2 years and all of a sudden it comes back. You know what that is? That's when you beat something down and beat something down and beat something down but don't kill it. And what it says is he went to him, and after he had killed him, he cut his head off. I challenge you to do that with the enemies in your life. I challenge you to do that with the things that are holding you back forever and ever and ever. Beat it, kill it, chop its head off so that it never comes back in you. How do you do that? You find people around you to make sure you don't go back. You find friends that deal with the same thing over and over and over again and make this thing work, and you trust in God's power. Because that's exactly what David did. Verse 52, we'll wrap this part up. It says, then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. The Israelites jumped into the battle when? After the real hero was dead. How many of you would just consider yourself bandwagon football fans? Anybody? You know what that means? You're the fan of the team that's doing really, really good until they're not, and then you're not a fan anymore? All of you that, back in the day when Georgia wasn't really good, you didn't care, but now you're like huge Georgia fans? Yep. That's exactly what I see the Israelites as in this story. And I want you to hear something very depressing for you tonight. But when God calls you to deal with something, you can't count on anybody else to do it but you. You cannot sit around and wait for your friends to deal with your problem. You cannot sit around and go, man, if I do get in a group, if I do find some buddies, if I do have a meeting, if I do talk to other people, maybe they'll deal with my problem. You know what? They're not coming into the fight until the problem is dealt with. Why? Because that's just who they are. Yeah, but I got a buddy who's right there with me. I understand that. And these guys are right there with him too, right behind him, watching him fight this enemy. But I want you to understand that I'm not talking negative about all your friends tonight. I'm telling you that when God calls you to step up and do something, it's time for you to step up and do that. It's not about getting a group of friends together. It's not about helping other people make your decision and solve your problem. It's about you stepping up and being the man. And you know what? You may be the only man that steps up to lead your family the way God calls you to lead it. But you know what? God blesses that because he says do it. You may be the only one that actually has rules for your teenager and lives out those rules. But you know what? God calls you to lead your teenager. And he's going to bless you for that, and you're going to do it. You may be the only person in America that pays all the taxes you should because everybody else is cheating. But you know what? God's going to bless you for standing up and being the person that does what he's called you to do. So as you look at this, and as you look at the story of how David dealt with this, you recognize that God called him to go fight that enemy. God called him to go kill that king, and he did that because that's what God called him to do. Tonight, Philippians tells you, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Scripture tells you all over the place that all the power you need to do, everything that you need to do is in God. Tonight, I hope and pray that you've been challenged in a way to look at what you learned from David's life and follow those examples in your own life. I want to pray for you. Is our band coming to do one more? Y'all done? You're up? All right, they're coming back. I want to pray for you.